Hi, this is Graham Allen, and coming to you just with some recent plays and things that I've also managed to pick up. One is an album that goes way back, just listening to it, re-listening to it. Actually, I haven't listened to it for a long time. Okay, so first of all, this was a charity shop find, and it's Barbara Thompson's Paraphernalia. This is from 1984. And the main reason I picked this up was for John Heisman, her husband, who plays drums on this and is absolutely superb. This is jazz fusion, but quite melodic, not overly busy jazz fusion. 1984, well past the sort of the peak of the busy fusion period in the 70s. So kind of very much emphasis on compositions, which are excellent. And also, I love fretless bass, and the bass player on this, Dave Ball, plays a lot of fretless bass on here. There's some great soloing. There he is. And we've also got Bill Worrell on keyboards as well, who is really terrific. Some great synth soloing on this. So delighted to pick this up. It's on the John Heisman's own Temple Music TM Records label. They had the studio down in Surrey and recorded quite a lot there. Temple Music was the studio setup. So delighted to get that. Very cheap. Don't often see that kind of stuff in charity shops here. Barbara Thompson's Paraphernalia. Really good jazz fusion album. Next is a recent purchase along slightly the same lines. This is Derek Sherinian, Oceana, and it's really progressive jazz fusion. And again, one of the main reasons I picked this up was for the drumming of Simon Phillips, who plays on the whole of the album with Derek Sherinian, and in fact has just released a Phillips Sherinian live album. This is from 2011. It's called Oceana, and Derek Sherinian was keyboard player in the prog metal band Dream Theater. But this is a little bit less metally. I'm not really into my prog metal. I like more keyboard dominated progressive rock. And so this is just really good prog fusion, I'd describe it as. And this came out 2011 as I mentioned, and I'll just show you the back cover. There, and we've got the main writers, Derek Sherinian and Simon Phillips, of course, the sort of mega drummer. We've got Doug Aldrich and Joe Bonamassa contributing on guitar, along with Steve Lukather from Toto. We've got Tony Franklin contributing some bass. So kind of quite a stellar cast of guests, but the underlying sort of groundwork is done all by Simon Phillips and of course Derek Sherinian. My one sort of thing with this later prog fusion is sometimes the keyboard sounds that were in vogue more recently are where the keyboard soloing tends to imitate guitar soloing with quite a shrill tone to the synthesizers. And I kind of prefer the more electronic sort of Moog sounds from the 70s rather than that sort of aping the keyboard sounds. My one sort of criticism really of more recent busy keyboard dominated albums often use this guitar tone on the keyboards. But it's a really good album. That's Derek Sherinian, Oceana, 2011 release, and it's got Simon Phillips on drums. Okay, next up is an album that I picked up off Amazon. This is an Italian progressive rock band called The Trip, and this album is called Atlantide. It's from 1973 and is keyboard dominated Italian progressive rock. The band had actually been around in the late 60s, and interestingly, one Ritchie Blackmore from Deep Purple was a member of the band very briefly in the 60s. He didn't stay with the band, he didn't record with the band, but he was part of the band. They had an Anglo connection when they originally started up. And I think, like quite a lot of bands, their style was very different in the 60s, much more kind of poppy, melodic. And then they kind of adopted the Italian progressive rock sound of the 70s. So this is on yellow, and it's a limited edition of 500. So it's on this, comes on this sort of yellow vinyl. This is, as I said, keyboard dominated. There are some vocals on here, and I should mention the drummer, who has got a terrific name for a drummer, Furio Chirico. And having looked him up, and I was vaguely familiar with him, or certainly his name, he's quite a legend in Italy, and just being so fast and furious, like his name, he's gone on to do things like drum clinics and things like that in Italy. Not really known that well outside of Italy, but his drumming style is really, really frenzied. There's actually quite a long drum solo on here, which I know is not to everyone's taste, but he's quite exceptional. Very clean, fast style. And I mean, if you're into kind of really far out drumming, this is quite an interesting album. So this is Atlantide, The Trip. As I said, limited edition of 500. And this is on Sony Music, actually, is the publisher of this album. Okay, so just two to go. So jazz fusion, again, probably sort of progressive rock jazz fusion. A lot of people will know this. This is Bill Bruford's debut solo album, Feels Good to Me. A bit of a classic in the genre, and this was recorded during an incredibly creative period for Bill Bruford. So people will know Yes, and then King Crimson. And then this came out in 77, 78. In that year, he'd also formed the band UK with Alan Holdsworth, John Wetton, and Eddie Jobson, and produced a stunning classic album, UK, progressive rock with a hint of jazz fusion. And then unfortunately Bruford and Holdsworth left the band, and Bruford finished off this album. He went in a more kind of jazz fusion style, and this is really a classic album. It's on the Polydor label, and this has on keyboards Dave Stewart from Hatfield in the North, and Egg, National Health as well. And Dave Stewart, of course, went on to work with Barbara Gaskin and produce some pop stuff. It also has Annette Peacock on a couple of tracks on vocals, unusual vocal style. And it's got some stellar bass playing from Jeff Berlin, who was relatively unknown when Bruford picked him up to work with this band. Bruford has spoken about wanting an American bass player, sort of highly virtuosic bass player. Jeff Berlin probably got a little bit pushed to the side at the time by Jaco Pastorius during those years, sort of 76, 77, when really was the height of bass players and fusion. But Jeff Berlin is a stunning player, and his playing on this is absolutely incredible. And of course, Alan Holdsworth on guitar is just as usual, utterly stellar. Some great tracks on this, really varied, a monster of a debut album for the Bruford band. Highly recommended. And then last up, my favourite band, I just wanted to go back to this. This was an album that I purchased on the day of release, so I was very excited. Emerson, Lake and Palmer in concert, captures the 77, 78 American tour. Some of this is recorded with the orchestra that ELP took around with them, and it almost bankrupted them. But they played at the Montreal Olympic Stadium famously to 88,000 people with the full symphony orchestra. Some of the tracks made it onto this album, which was released later on as a double CD. The whole concert was released with the orchestra. Some of these tracks are actually the trio. ELP went back to the trio really after the major leg of the tour with the orchestra to recoup some costs, which they did. And there's some great trio tracks on here, notably The Enemy God, which is a sort of Carl Palmer vehicle, a classical piece by Prokofiev with some great drumming from Carl Palmer. It has Knife Edge on here with the orchestra, and it has Pictures at an Exhibition in abbreviated form, also with the orchestra, from the Montreal Olympic Stadium, which we can see there on the cover. Interestingly, when this came out, this was 1979, and I remember reading a review of it in Sounds. Sounds, of course, was very kind of anti-progressive rock during these kind of years, late 70s. It was much more backing the new wave punk movement. So this was seen as kind of really something to be derided. And it got 1 star. And I just remember reading nothing about the actual playing or the album, but just kind of saying these dinosaurs should be put out of their misery. So that wasn't very helpful. Not that I needed a review of the album to go and get it. I remember picking this up on the day of release and being very excited to get home and play it. It's a good album. It's the recording is not the best. They had some audio problems, particularly at the Montreal gig with the orchestra. You can imagine very complex miking up a full orchestra, balancing it with a very sort of powerful progressive trio. But the results are good, and there was an unreleased track called Peter Gunn, a cover of Peter Gunn, which opens the album, which actually was released as a single. I'd never heard that before at the time, so that was kind of like a new ELP track, and it's a good version. Using the Yamaha GX1 polysynth, but it really rocks. So Emerson, Lake and Palmer in concert, that's 1979, that came out on Atlantic Records, and was just a bit like going back to an old pair of shoes. Very, very comforting to listen to that. Okay, hope you enjoyed this, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.